Phil Phails at philosophy. What the heck could it be? Life such a mystery. Phil Phails.
I do like this setup. The puzzles, tarot decks, Palo Santo, and animal Buddha figures.
Yeah. You're not the first person to say that. That Ashton said the same thing.
Like,
she liked it too.
It's a good consortium. It's a good arrangement of
and like
a Phil's icky guy.
Yeah, icky guy. It sounds like you're saying icky guy.
I know.
Like an icky guy.
Uh-huh.
What neckerchief is this?
You're gonna make me wear a neckerchief? No, you're
one. I can no. For you and
no. I don't want.
Happy to wear.
I want you to wear the one that's the green on the far left.
This guy?
Yeah.
This is a good one for today. I think this is a good one. I like this one. It's floral. It's a nice floral neckerchief. Yesterday, Ashton, I wore the Big Ben one yesterday. Let's see here. Clockety clock. Yeah, it's puzzles, tarot, animal Buddhists, animal meditators, some smoke, and a little bit of leftovers from Halloween.
Oh yeah,
the pumpkins.
That's
what we have. You got the book?
I do.
Wow. We're on the right chapter. Is this the right chapter?
Yeah, we're on chapter 7, right?
Yeah. So this is episode 8.
Yeah. I think when I wrote and said 6, I was like,
is he right? Did I miss something? And then I started thinking, did I? I thought we already did. Why do good things happen to bad people?
I think we did. Yeah.
I thought we did that last. We talked about karma and stuff.
Mm-hmm. That means we only have one more chapter.
We'll have to find something else to read.
You'll have to pick out this one.
I pick it out?
Mm-hmm.
I found Vasubandhu's 22 verses.
Yeah.
Someone on the internet was like, it's not Vasubandhu's 20 verses, it's his 30 verses. And then he actually has a 30 verses and a 20 verses.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at the 20 verses a little bit, and I thought, what would it be kind of cool to go through those? Then I just started brainstorming. I'm like, what will we do next? What can we explore next? Part of me thought just go through all these again, and
just reread them.
Well, yeah, I think one read is something,
mm-hmm.
but then going through it after I'm already familiar with it might be cool. I'm sure new conversations will emerge, and because when I read through or edit these, I feel like such a novice, such a noob to the concepts. Almost like I'm watching me roll onto it, understand it, and seeing, I understood that a different way than I think the writer intended, or sort of stack definitely onto that.
Yeah, that's one of the nice things about kind of going back through any document of your learning of a new set of concepts or new set of ideas, is you can see your brain kind of taking it in, appropriating it, basically generating the things you're familiar with as a place to connect, which is so necessary to make that connection. But then once you're there, you're like, wait, I don't think I have that right.
Yeah. And I think from that place, you can really build upon from a place of understanding.
Right.
Or at least a greater understanding, and then really contribute, I think, in a more
absolutely
kind of meaningful way. All right. You ready to get this show on the road?
Yeah.
Are you going to wear those glasses the whole time?
Probably not.
The only reason I mention it is there's a glare. I can't see your eyes.
It's fine.
There's a glare in this one. But I like it when you put it on every now and again when you want to look smart. And then you you got to take them off and look at the
I know.
You know how the guy does in the SVU? You take it off. Yeah.
This is for you.
One of those like cop shows where the guy makes the bold statement that's like kind of a
Oh, special victims unit.
he makes like a statement like it's kind of like a Arnold Schwarzenegger like pun, and then he takes off his glasses and he looks at the camera. He'll say like, like say a body has been burned, he would be like, I think this guy's too hot to trot, and they'll take it off and look at the camera or something silly like that. You don't have to do that, but all right, you ready?
Sure.
So this is just refreshing my memory. It's Philosophy Book Club, episode 8. And you got it close by because we'll talk about we'll mention the title of the chapter, which I don't remember exactly what it was. So if you
the title of the chapter is,
you want to bookend it or put a bookmark in there,
yeah, how much is enough? Greed, prosperity,
we're not doing it yet.
and the economic problem of happiness.
Well, bookmark it. I'll ask you to read that.
Okay.
All right, ready?
Mm-hmm. Well, I gotta bookmark it, right?
Yeah,
That's good.
That's good.
Yeah.
Welcome to Phil Phails. My name is Philip Jones, and today we're doing Phil Phails at Philosophy Book Club with Grant Potts. That is Grant Potts. You know him from all the previous
From Phil Phails at Philosophy Book Club.
episodes 1 through 7. This is episode 8. Yeah. And we're talking about greed.
Yeah, our chapter is chapter 7, How Much is Enough? Greed, Prosperity, and the Economic Problem of Happiness, a Comparative Perspective, by Stephen Emmanuel, the person
He's the editor.
who edited the...
Hold the book up. We're reading Philosophy's Big Questions, Comparing Buddhist and Western Approaches. And this is the editor, Stephen M. Emmanuel. This is one of his chapters on greed.
Greed.
And this is chapter 8. Or this is episode 8, chapter 7. If you wanna listen to us talk about greed, I think the things that this hits upon for me is just informing them of what they're gonna embark upon listening to us, is kind of his historic context of America and capitalism and consumerism vis-a-vis Adam Smith, and in a little bit further with Milton Friedman. Also, the Buddhist perspective on, I don't know, how to live a good life. And then third most is we revisit the first chapter with human flourishing. Remember, the first chapter was like how to live a good human life, and we touch upon that.
Yeah.
So if you wanna stay tuned, you'll hear us talk about those things: greed, how much is enough, what does it mean to consume, and then a good human life. Is that right? Do you have anything to add about what they're gonna?
I have no idea.
Did you read the chapter?
I did.
Okay.
But,
Grant's still waking up.
yeah, I'm still waking up. I'll make it up as I go.
Yeah, he'll make it up as he goes.
I'm following Phil's lead.
I've got notes.
Yeah.
Y'all, I took notes again.
He's the moderator, so like I just do what he says.
Yeah.
In fact, nothing I've said here is actually me. It's always just like he just says, "Hey, make sure you say this because it'll get hits."
I write scripts, y'all. That's not true. None of that's true. So we're talking about greed. They use this word a lot in this chapter. I mean, the title of the chapter was a lot of words, but it seems to come down to greed.
Yeah, it's a curious chapter to me, partly because the Buddhist takeaway of it, like seems very, you're right, it's very much like the first chapter. It's about kind of re-emphasizing that notion of flourishing, right? In the face of this discussion of what the majority of the chapter is this discussion of, on one hand, Adam Smith, and not so much, I mean, there's a little bit from Wealth of Nations, which is what people know Adam Smith for, and figures like Milton Friedman, like especially those kind of late 20th century economists that put forward this neoliberal model of greed is good as leading to prosperity, kind of often put themselves in relationship to Adam Smith, so it makes sense. But there's an interesting thing when you read the chapter, you realize partly because he's spending a lot more time with the theory of moral sentiments, right?
He does mention that,
which is I think a much more, like, I think you understand what Adam Smith is doing more if you engage with a theory of moral sentiments as an aspect of engaging with Wealth of Nations.
Yeah.
Wealth of Nations is one of those books that is often referenced and rarely read, right? And people are just like, it's the invisible handbook, right?
Yeah, invisible hand,
which is a metaphor he uses in it, but there's a much more complicated argument he's making in Wealth of Nations that I think is even more framed out in a theory of moral sentiments, and he kind of teases that out without necessarily bringing it to the foreground as much, which I find curious because I think at the end of the day, part of what he ends up showing you is that kind of late 20th century greed is good interpretation of how a free market economy leads to prosperity is actually at odds with what Adam Smith was putting forward, right?
Oh, backtrack just a second. Adam Smith.
Yeah.
Scottish economist. He wasn't really an economist.
He's a moral, Well, I mean, he's a moral philosopher,
and he's one of our founding he's not a founding father, but he's definitely someone who had a big influence on capitalism and consumerism. Previous to Adam Smith, we saw the wealth of a nation through the amount of gold and silver, precious metals that a state had in stockpile. It was like, how much gold you got? That was your wealth.
Right.
And then after Adam Smith, it was more GDP, gross domestic product.
Right.
How much is this country producing?
Yeah, he gets us to, on a political level, in terms of political economy, to focus on not a hoarding of wealth as a path to prosperity.
Yeah.
But rather an opening up of markets, right? Now, he clearly is articulating an opening up of markets as a marketplace, right? Which is a regulated space.
Yeah.
But it's a regulated space that is, would regulate for infrastructure, would regulate for safety. I actually think if you read like The Economist, that news magazine, in terms of today's economic conversation, they still seem anchored in what is a truly classic kind of liberal model like Adam Smith.
Okay.
But because they similarly will often have like, they're not an anti-regulatory kind of understanding.
Yeah, Adam Smith, he believed in the regulation.
Right, but the regulation needs to be functional. What you don't do is regulate to protect markets. You regulate for safety, you regulate to create infrastructure, you regulate to manage things to some extent, but for the most part, you have a lot more trust in the human beings to do their thing, right?
Yeah.
And to exchange. I think part of what comes out, though, is that he has a vision of that working when there's a certain kind of moral community focused on a certain understanding of a good life, which is not excessive gathering of goods, right? So that's part of what I think Stephen Emmanuel is kind of teasing out here, is that like he's really saying that this works not because everyone's greedy, but because they have self-interest.
Yeah, Adam Smith called it self-love.
Right.
Economic growth and progress.
But that's different than kind of greed. And that ends up being the interesting thing about this chapter, is it ends up kind of turning toward really what is a much more personal discussion of kind of desire for wealth in particular.
Yeah.
Desire for goods, desire for things you consume.
Yeah.
And how corrupting that is.
Well,
right?
Yeah, the machine of that, it seems to be at odds with moderation. like once you have a desire, like they talked about it later on, I'll jump ahead, of virtues of contentment versus industriousness.
Right.
Which was this, like, gathering wealth or acquiring wealth for the well-being of yourself and others, versus industriousness, which was like, how can I get more?
Right. Just
how
more,
can I
more, more,
improve
more.
my position in life? And those seem to be really at odds.
Right.
Because one is happy with what you have, and the other is striving for more.
Right. And happy with what you have and I guess like that contentment it's not that doesn't create a space for going out and improving, right? But ultimately the goal is to have a good life for yourself and others, and not just to acquire.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's where kind of that greed is good Milton Friedman thing goes sideways, right? It sees raw acquisition as the driver of economic prosperity. And I mean, I think if you look at the application of that into public policy in the years since Milton Friedman said that, it doesn't seem to do what Milton Friedman said. And that's part of my disappointment in this chapter, is he's citing this sort of liberal
trickle-down economics. This is the Ronald Reagan trickle-down.
Right, and this is like contemporary economists, you can find economists who still believe in it, but most contemporary economists have recognized that kind of unregulated, greed-oriented growth contributes to the expansion of economic inequality, the expansion of poverty, the things that it says it was supposed to solve, it's not doing, right?
Well, this isn't trickle-down economics. It's give rich people more and the poor people. That's a premise of this. They mention it over and over, is the negative aspects of greed or consumerism, the higher productivity, the inequality, is all balanced out by the poor being lifted.
Yeah, that's the argument, is that all, like, even if there's greater inequality, the poor are lifted.
Yeah.
Right.
They've got a higher standard of living.
Right.
And we need the rich to get really rich in order for the poor to get a little bit less poor, or to have a better standard of living.
Right.
Yeah.
And that may be true, right? Like there may be the case may be that to set up an economic system that produces the best life for the people who are the least well off within that system, some inequality, some foregrounding of self-interest, right, is going to bring that about. Like, that's an empirical question, right? We can, and often the problem is we get caught up in our ideologies and trying to assess that as an empirical question, right? Like, what strategies actually produce what outcomes?
Yeah.
But you actually have to check the outcome, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can't just say it's making poor people's lives better if it's not.
Yeah. It's the rising water lifts all boats type.
Right. But it may not. It may
might
be that
not.
the rising water just floods you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
yeah. Yeah. So that's kind of the beginning chapters. The notes I have are merchant. Adam Smith talks a lot about the merchant class, which I thought about you, because your studies were about how the merchant class gave rise to the Freemasons, right?
Yeah, to some extent. Yeah. Yeah.
So I thought, hey, maybe Grant's going to be.
Yeah, that kind of new economic class that's emerging around this time. Yeah, definitely.
And this is around, how should the merchants behave? And they talk about their accumulation of wealth for the merchant class would be a boon to society. But at the same time, they said, don't expect kindness, generosity, or compassion from them.
Right.
They're going to act in ways that are very, very, like, predictable. If you present something that's in their best interest, it needs to be mutually beneficial. They're not going to do something because, like, oh, this just benefits you. There's not an altruistic kind of bone in their body. It's when you go talk to them, I think the quote they had was, if you go and ask them for something, you need to make sure they understand how it's good for them and how it's going to benefit them.
Right, because it's in an economics of exchange, not of gifting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that might be, whether I like it or not, I think that's probably real. When you go and talk to someone about it, you want them to think about how it's going to be good for them, even if it's stroking their altruistic ego.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's somewhere in between, because like when I think about even the merchant class through history and kind of how it's impacted the world for good, like as a class, it's often not been either of those stories. Like it's not been this group of people who are like, this is our money.
Yeah.
We're going to keep it. Right. But it's also not been a group of people who went into a economic transaction, right? No, I mean, like, no, like where they would say, all right, we're going to make a deal. And all right, well, I'm just going to let you run all over me for it, right?
Yes.
You know, like that's not how it works. But it is, I think it's people who in their business transactions have strived to be maybe fair and just as applied in kind of basic contract theory, right?
Fair.
Right. Yeah.
Like from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's like the win-win.
Right. Like
seeking the win-win.
Seeking the win-win, but also looking out for their self-interest. But then at the same time, as they gain wealth, becoming the class that actually sets up the charitable organizations, sets up the schools, like builds the institutions that produce the real wealth in the long run. And I think that's partly, I mean, as much as I'm not a big fan of Ford, that's partly the dream of Fordism, right? Is that you actually not only bring wealth to yourself, but produce enough wealth around you that you actually expand your market,
your community,
right? You for your community, but you also expand your market, and so I think that's what's lost in the Milton Friedman era of capitalism that we're
and that's
trying
what
to
we come
recover
back to
from,
with
right?
Buddhism. This like idea of when we get to the Buddhist side, this idea of well-being for self and others.
Right.
I think when they come back to the Western side, they talk about, well, they're doing a lot of that for their own kind of vanity.
Right.
They're doing it because,
right.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
they put their name on the school because they want to be this big figure in the world.
Right.
And that's just their insatiable desire for vanity and for, which is interesting because this conversation here happens in the backdrop of the election, where we have one.
It's all vanity. Yeah.
Well, I don't know about vanity. Yeah, I don't know about vanity, but what I will share is the person who won is someone that has put his name on a lot of things.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah. Trump puts his name on a lot of things. He's made a career out of licensing the rights to use Trump as a name, putting it on products, putting it on buildings, putting it on, all kinds of, putting it on Bibles. So there's this idea of like, get my name out there into the world. Let me be known in this society.
Yeah. And in the process seems to have convinced the world that he is a path to economic prosperity, right? Like because the thing that strikes me coming out of the election itself is like, at least the preliminary discussions around exit polls is like, who voted for, of course, there were the ideologues that voted for Trump because they like his rhetoric.
Yeah.
But the vast majority of people who seem to have voted for him kind of just ignored the hateful, rhetoric, and just were in a space of like, inflation's bad and we need a change.
Yeah.
And you ask them what that change is that they see coming, they're like, I don't know. It just needs to be different.
Yeah.
Right. And so that economic self-interest or perceived economic self-interest seems to drive it. But I think this is like what really the discussion of Buddhism gets at, right? Perceived economic self-interest is not economic self-interest.
Yeah.
That's what allows you to get taken advantage of by charlatans, is when it's all about, I mean, that's sort of, I can play on that vanity that it's not that you want to actually secure a good life for yourself and the people you love. It's that you want to perceive yourself as the kind of person who will secure
the mask,
right,
or something,
good life for yourself and the people you love, and so you're very easily caught up in the image, right?
Let's time box a discussion about the election,
right,
and the because I think it'll be topical,
right,
and I think it fits into this,
right,
in a couple ways that I'll guide us through, and you can guide us through as well. But I want to time box it because I have a feeling that you and I are both anti-Trump, or like we're not pro-Trump.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
And I realize that a majority of America is pro-Trump.
yeah. Well, yeah.
So I don't want to lose.
I don't want to lose.
I don't want to lose the audience. Y'all can still like and watch us if you're pro-Trump. We want this to be a balanced and kind of honest discussion that's not necessarily bashing anybody, but
right. And I think that's not useful, right? That
yeah, I agree.
like even from the perspective of people who might think that this is potentially a very dangerous space for the next 4 years for our country, right? Continuing to do that through a strategy of bashing, is not useful.
I mean, I think that's a big problem with what's going on now in the political landscape, is this inability to cross the aisle and have discourse and talk to people and understand. And I think right now, the people that are in my echo chamber, I live in Austin, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
This is a pretty liberal town. And I think and all these people are into meditation and a lot of woke stuff, a lot of like mindful, all that stuff. And the one place where it seems like they lack the ability to have acceptance, empathy, and compassion is with folks that have a political ideology that's different from theirs.
Yeah.
And I think that's a place where they probably benefit the most from applying that acceptance, learning about how people feel about, how did you arrive at that? Can we find some middle ground?
Yeah. I mean, if I know we said we were going to box it, but we're not. But I think when I think about what just happened, right? There's part of me that woke up that morning after the election and was like, wow, a majority of my neighbors, a majority of the people that I share this country with, that I have loved my whole life, right? That I have really felt like, for all its problems, led me into a life of goodness, of prosperity, good life, right?
These are your fellow countrymen,
right? That they decided to elect someone who was calling out me and my family as the enemy within, right? That rhetoric was there.
Yeah. What is the enemy within? From your perspective, what is the enemy within?
I mean, he explicitly started kind of going through the list of people that he had talked, including LGBTQ people. And so, yeah.
Oh, is that what he said?
Yeah. So that's a space within the kind of broader rhetoric that I woke up with. Is just like, I'm a target.
It's like, reminiscent of the Red Scare.
Right.
Reminiscent.
Exactly.
Blacklisting and.
Right. And it is kind of vague what that means, but that's precisely the problem.
The vagueness is oftentimes a tool for like allowing the radicals to kind of interpret and then.
Yeah. And so that's like, I woke up feeling more a target.
Yeah.
Right. I already feel a target, but more a target of not only, I live in a state that is trying to criminalize many of the things that my community has tried to build, right?
Right.
I have a lot of good friends who are trying to figure out exit strategies from Texas where they've built their lives because the repeal of gay marriage is really on the table.
Yeah.
And if the national repeal of gay marriage happens, that the next day, Texas is going to annul everybody's marriage.
Yeah.
Right. That means loss of ability to see your kid in the hospital.
Yeah.
Right. So all of that is there. So how did that happen? Like, it's just how did my neighbors vote in a way that clearly seems to bring harm to me? Right.
Yeah.
And you could go, well, you're overinterpreting it. It's like, no, I think if you listen to it and you look at the policy that's being put out and the policy briefs by the people there, that's real. Like, that's not the problem. The problem isn't that we've misdiagnosed that it's more dangerous than it is. It truly is dangerous for a lot of us.
How do we come upon a country where a majority of the people are okay with it?
The problem is, I think, to some extent, right? At least within the sphere of where we have power, where I have power, is, we're not making friends with our neighbors.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, yeah, we live in echo chambers.
And if you look at the history, just going back to my earlier example, if you look at the history of how we went from what I grew up in, which is that, we lived in a culture where the primary insult that another boy threw at another boy while they were beating them up was faggot.
Oh yeah.
Right? That's
you were gay.
Yeah, that's what
I remember that.
You and I were growing up in, right?
Mm-hmm.
To having gay marriage legalized, right?
Yeah.
How did that happen? It happened because a huge sentiment shifted in our country around homosexuality, and that happened because grandmas no longer could support a regime that victimized homosexuals because they had homosexual grandchildren. They had family members.
I've got a question about this.
Right. So,
I don't know that happened everywhere. I think that happened in cities, in urban environments. I think in countrysides and in rural areas, I don't think that transition that you're talking about occurred.
I think you're wrong. Partly because I remember reading the research about this 10 years ago as it was happening, is it was widespread. It was surprisingly rural, right? In terms of the shift of the sentiment. And that doesn't mean that in rural areas, and it's not always rural urban, sometimes we kind of make that breakdown. So
yeah.
There are definitely very conservative urban spaces. There are definitely very progressive rural spaces.
Okay.
Yeah. There's regionalization for sure. Right. And part of that regionalization is that division. But yeah, no, it's not like suddenly those spaces that were deeply anti-queer suddenly became a majority. But they went from being 20% anti-gay marriage to 35% anti-gay marriage, right? That progression happened everywhere. And when you dug into what was going on, the main thing people seemed to be citing as the reason why they shifted was that they had a family member or a friend and they could see the way they suffered.
Oh, you mean, you said that shifted to 35% anti-gay marriage. You mean pro-gay marriage?
Yeah.
They wanted more people to get.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Sorry. Yeah. But that's
because they saw the suffering in a family member
or a friend or a neighbor.
So it was touch points. It was what we talk about in Buddhism, where you see the suffering in another person, right, and you really have empathy and compassion, and you don't want other people to suffer.
But you got to be that person to that other person. So if your main strategy is screw you, you have a different political belief for me, you're not my friend, that's a losing strategy.
I mean, I think that has gotten greater and greater and greater in this country, to where we will draw relational lines, right, on political, right, opinions. When I was joking with my daughter about voting for Trump, and she was like, I'll never talk to you again.
Yeah.
That's my daughter.
Yeah.
And I think it's very common now. Folks talk about, hey, I'm just going to unfriend people in social media, right, if they post certain things that I don't agree with. And yeah, this chasm,
right,
this chasm between our countrymen doesn't allow us to have these touch points for them to feel compassion and to feel empathy, to witness suffering. It's the same thing I think that occurs socioeconomically, where we have very wealthy people in gated communities. They don't ever have to see the suffering of the poor, right, because they've isolated themselves so much so that it never comes into their psyche that the poor, right, have problems, that I should do something to uplift them, because all I see are putting greens and jet streams.
Right. Yeah. No, I think so. Yeah. Isolation is not the strategy. And I think listening, understanding, saying, okay, what was it that drove you to vote if you voted on an economic issue?
Yeah.
Why did you believe that this would lead there? I mean, and I just think I think we need to just develop different strategies, and I think those strategies need to be relational.
I agree 100%.
Yeah.
Back to Trump, and we can maybe talk about this 15 minutes more. He wrote a book called The Art of the Deal. And I think about that
Which I read when I was in 5th grade.
I did too. I thought, like, when I was growing up, I think this might be a part of it.
Right.
Trump has been a character in our lives, our
Right.
whole lives.
Right.
He's been a character in Americans' lives since we were young.
He is the kind of like stock character of the Milton Friedman dream.
Yeah. What was the Wall Street?
Mm-hmm.
The gecko, right?
Mm-hmm. You mean the movie Wall Street?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where he says, greed is good. You know,
Right.
that's the Milton Friedman he talks about. But I think in The Art of the Deal and the thing we see in Trump's negotiation is not a win-win strategy. It's really like you win when you've taken advantage, when you've gotten the better hand.
Right. And that you win when you don't play fair.
Yeah.
Right. And that is the difference between an Adam Smith vision of economic prosperity through capitalism and a Trump vision, right?
Yeah.
This vision is take advantage of the situation as best you can, take what you can get, and go. This vision is you need a system that is well regulated, if open, right? If built around having open markets with a set of rules that people can play by, but which they also develop the moral character to honor.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, like I think that there's a lot of good that can come from markets, right?
Yeah.
And free and open markets. But those can't come without character, which is, I think, what the Buddhist argument is too, right? That it's really about
well, they talk about virtues,
who you are,
yeah,
and how you relate to that,
right?
And building a community in which that you cultivate those virtues amongst yourselves, right? And then, yeah, you know, wealth would trickle down if the wealthy had the character to share it.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. But it's almost like wealth is a like sugar. It gives you cavities.
Yeah,
Wealth
it can.
Corrupts.
You got to be careful with it. Yeah.
It corrupts because, you know, it seems like it leads to this insatiable desire for amassing and accumulating, which is interesting. That was what we shifted from when we talked about wealth of a nation.
Right.
This amassing and hoarding of wealth. And Adam Smith shifted that to, no, it's actually productivity. And now we have...
And trade.
And trade, yeah. This, like, it's a back and forth. It's a fluid environment. And now we have, when you have a lot of wealth and greed being the underpinnings of your kind of way you move through the world, now you're hoarding and you're kind of like walling off your wealth.
Right.
And I think about the way Trump is, you know, if all these things are right, if all the stuff I've heard in documentaries about Trump, he like would make deals that were maybe probably in his best interest, but seem like they were okay for all the parties, but then he wouldn't even honor his side of it by not paying the people.
That's what I mean,
what he agreed on.
He doesn't even play by the rules.
And then he would utilize, well, he kind of would, because then he would utilize the legal system. He would pay lawyers.
Right.
Instead of honoring the four corners of the document the agreement, he would, you know, use lawyers to figure out how to navigate it. What I'm thinking of is one of the things where he or his family or his business owned these rental places, and they wouldn't rent to minorities.
Right.
They would tell them, hey, we don't have any available. And a white family would come and he would say, okay, we do have them available. Or they would say they cost this amount for a minority and then a different amount for a white family. And then they were put to task by the government for those behaviors.
Right.
And he fought and he fought and he fought and he never pled guilty.
Right.
He settled.
Right.
But part of the settlement was never admitting guilt.
Right.
So there's this part of like utilizing the legal system, which is kind of playing by the rules. I mean, that's the rules of but you're sidestepping, I think, accountability. You're sidestepping that responsibility to the well-being of yourself and others.
Yeah. And, you know, I think about my experience as a tabletop gamer, both role-playing and board gaming. is there's a certain kind of player who's super competitive, and they say they're trying to play by the rules, but really what they're doing is just constantly trying to find the holes in the rules
Yes.
to get ahead.
The loopholes.
Right? That's not playing by the rules. That's not operating with integrity. That's a form of really attacking the integrity of what always has to be a relatively, like, no rule set is going to be perfect for every
No, they're just
situation.
figuring out where there's
So,
some gray area in the rules and how can I
right.
take advantage of that. And then what you end up with is a game that has to have so many rules just to accommodate all those
Right.
folks.
Right. And that's its own corrupting thing, because then it rigidifies everything and makes it hard for people to act.
To where it's not fun anymore.
Right. Or you have no ability to manage that, and then you just have these people who ride roughshod over everybody else. And
Kind of, that's where we get back to this
like, it's corrupting.
character.
Yeah.
You need everybody to understand the gray area and the intent, because you have the words and then you have the intent of the words. But folks can look at it and say, hey, these words don't necessarily codify what I'm doing. Then we can argue the interpretation.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's sort of, there's this interesting part at the beginning of the chapter where it's just very brief. He talks about kind of the Buddhist concept of self, right? The negative self here, right? That is identifying yourself with what you can acquire and own in the world, right?
Right.
Right. Where you're just kind of like, you're getting your sense of who you are and your value
Right.
out of this ability to
Amass wealth.
amass the world, right?
Yeah.
And it's wealth is the way we're thinking about it, but I think in the fundamental concept, it's amassing control of the world. It's our desire to project ourselves out and say, this is mine.
Yeah.
This is me, right? This is my brand. This is like all the things that to some extent we've developed as strategies of productivity, right? Like you were saying at the beginning, of industriousness.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting way to relate to the world through ownership. And I wonder if there's a way that we restructure through really looking at the world through responsibility, right? Recognizing that when you play the game, whatever game it is you're playing, whether it's a game at a tabletop or the game of life, part of your responsibility is to be part of the community that holds that in place for everybody to play, right?
Yeah.
And part of that is approaching it with a real honor to the space as a shared space. It's a responsibility to the world around you instead of an ownership around you. You're still projecting yourself out into the world, which may be at odds with kind of what the Buddhist teaching might be, which does seem to be more even just losing that level of identity with things. But yeah, so going back, yeah, you have to, there's all these moments in life, right, where you have that point where you're like, I could get ahead if I just bent the rule this
Well, we
way.
see so many people doing that.
Right.
That over and over and over.
Well, other people are getting away with it. Why shouldn't I?
Well, it seems like that's one of the ways to get extreme wealth.
Yeah.
The Ponzi schemes and the folks that don't follow the rules.
Yeah.
How have we come to be?
But then what is your wealth? I mean, that's the Buddhist question. Like, who are you and what is your wealth then? Like, sure, you have
your character?
You have a lot of stuff, but
yeah,
then who are you at the end of the day? And why should you value yourself? Like, if the whole game started because you're trying to feel value for yourself and you decided to value yourself because you can get a lot of shit at the expense of other people that produces real harm in those people, why should you value yourself?
Isn't that industrialization though? The idea of industrialization is I can put capital somewhere. I can take advantage of low cost of labor, get them to work. I can make an extreme amount of money on top of what their labor provides. And then, I gather more and more wealth.
Yeah, that's how it's evolved historically, but that doesn't have to be industriousness. Like an industrialization of a process is really about organizing the process to take advantage of efficiencies, right? And you can take advantage of efficiencies without necessarily having to exploit labor. You
Yeah.
still get those efficiencies, you just don't get them at the rate you do, right? So if you move from a craft process to an industrial process, right, through assembly line,
Right.
variety, through basically designing the process by which you produce a good,
Right.
and building efficiencies into that
Right.
process
That's
through scale, etc.
industrialization. Yeah.
You can do that and still treat the labor as human beings.
I don't think so. You're putting human beings in a veritable hamster wheel in order to get what you're doing. You have someone go and do the same thing over and over again, day after day. Their life is that 8 hours, 5 days a week.
Yeah.
I don't think that's no human being should be doing that.
But that's how we have taken on industrialization as a world, right? We've taken, just because historically that's how we did it doesn't mean that's the only way it can be done.
You're saying that that's the way America's done it, or that's the way
industrialization
industrialized world has done it,
because it came out of a situation in which, part of it is it came about in a period of time when in Europe, where Europe had just refined an entire framework for feeling good about exploiting other people through colonialism, right?
Yeah.
And so, right, and if you look at the industrialization of Europe and the United States, to some extent, it's just hey, this level of exploitation worked great in the colonies. Let's bring it home and exploit our own people in the same way. It's just like,
ugh, it's gross. It's gross.
But I guess, like, at the end of the day, I don't think that's about capitalism versus socialism or industrialization versus, I think to some extent those frameworks are important, but what's more important is the fundamental question of how are you treating the people you're working with?
Yeah.
How do you
view them?
The people that are impacted by the things you do, even if you don't see them? Are you remembering that they're human beings?
Yeah.
Are you then designing for human beings and not just for product? Right? It doesn't mean you can't include design for product and the efficiencies of product, but maybe 10% efficiency is what you get instead of 30%, because you got to lose 20% to actually being a friggin' human being.
To giving the folks that are helping you produce whatever you're producing a good life.
Right, exactly. So there's nothing good but wrong with generating wealth. There's nothing wrong with, and I think this is, like, when I was reading this, like, part of what I was, like, reflecting on was just like, part of the problem is that we have this sort of idea that it's either greed or you renounce everything and become a friggin' monk.
But neither side said that.
Right.
The Western side didn't say that, and the Buddhist side didn't say that.
Right. I mean, the Buddhist side kind of says, you sure want to be a monk.
So not for householders.
Right, but there's a level at which, like, but you should be a monk, right? You should be a monk because you got to be a monk to get enlightened. I mean, during the Mahayana reformations, there's a level at which, like, householders can enlighten.
Yeah, he talks about, and the Buddhist side, they talk about householders.
Right. And I think, so there's a place for that, at least, right? But, I mean, I think at the end of the day, right, it's not about necessarily renouncing the world, whether that's Buddhist or not, right?
Yeah.
It's about caring for the world, right? And I think, that's the other thing I think
talks about that a little bit. It did, well, a lot. Let's see. Talked about happiness and what happiness meant. Well, the Buddhists talked about greed and what greed, how they defined it. And it seemed like I saw 3 definitions of greed, which was self-centered longing or desire,
right?
Which fits into, like, grasping, attachment, like some kind of insatiable thing. And then lust or passion. It talked about lust or passion, or
just
craving,
just that kind of raw human greed or a sort of biological drive to acquire that is there from being an organism that comes out of a background of scarcity, right? Yeah.
I think about my grandparents and how they would, like, stockpile stuff.
Right.
They would stockpile cans of soup and different stuff. Like, they would have, like, and they'd be old, dusty in this, like, one pantry. And my mom still had that. That's how I believe in intergenerational kind of, like, trauma, because my mom still had this scarcity mindset, and I, to some extent, still have that scarcity mindset around money and saving stuff.
No, I absolutely. It's funny. As I was sort of processing the election, the first thing I thought was, I got to build out my pantry.
You got to build out your pantry?
I got to build out my pantry. I got to build out the things that allow us to survive and take care of each other if shit falls
In hard
apart.
times.
Yeah. So it's the same thing.
You know what I thought?
What?
I should probably invest in the stock market.
I mean, it's a similar thing. It's just that
that
you're
stuff is about to go up.
You're focused on capital, and I'm focused on the actual things we eat. But
yeah, that stock market's going up, y'all. Oh my god. And
or not.
Oh no, I think it already did.
I mean, it will for a while, and then we'll see what it does.
Well, that's what you need. That's when you do short term.
I know.
I didn't do it. I'm not going to do it just because
it's just
I thought
hassle.
I should. Yeah, I don't know how to do all that stuff.
Yeah, I haven't started building my pantry out.
Move things around. What are you going to start building a root cellar over there?
Yeah.
Buddhists talk about three things that are, I don't know what they call them, like kind of the challenges of our human existence. And those were greed, was like the first one. And they had words for them that I didn't write down. Buddhist words.
They had words for them.
They had different words than I'm saying.
Right. They have technical vocabulary.
I could pronounce them, but I didn't write them down, so I don't know them. And you guys wouldn't understand them anyway. So you want to find?
Or you would. I mean, Phil's making assumptions about who you are that may or may not be true.
Yeah, that's true. Y'all
don't harsh on him for it.
Yeah,
he's trying.
Greed. You got the word for that one? It's under when we first get to Buddhism, and he talks about the three different: greed, hatred, and delusion. And then he talks about the remedy for those three being generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom.
I remember this. Yeah.
Right before we start talking about the Anana Sutra or Anana Sutta. Is it Sutta?
I mean, it's both.
Yeah. And right before that, they were talking about there being some kind of like some balance or some weighing of wealth over virtue or wisdom, and saying that people were going for material prosperity at the expense of spiritual, at the cost of spiritual poverty.
Mm-hmm.
And what you were talking about earlier, that wealth, and what we were both talking about earlier, was that wealth separates people. There's less connection, less socializing when you have wealth. Extreme wealth, at least.
Okay, I found the part where you're talking about.
What's the word for greed?
Lobha, Lobha.
Lobha.
Right.
What's the word for hatred?
Dosa.
Dosa.
And delusion is moha.
Moha.
I mean, I may be pronouncing those terribly.
But you guys take it easy on Grant. He's just a normal guy trying to pronounce whatever language that is. What language is that, you think?
This is Pali.
Pali.
And Pali looks like Sanskrit because it's kind of like a later, it's almost like medieval Latin to classical Latin. It's a later version of Sanskrit, but it's what earliest Buddhist scriptures are written in. So, yeah, I'm going to read just briefly this. I don't know if I need to read it. And then go
ahead. You want to read it.
The Buddhist path to liberation, therefore, involves an inward transformation of the individual in which the mental defilements, and I just want to stop there, mental defilements.
Yeah.
And I sometimes what I appreciate about the Buddhist analysis is it doesn't hold back. Like, these things are poison.
They corrupt you.
Right. They corrupt you.
Yeah.
And part of what I like the idea about mental defilements is it's not like something that's yours that you're being asked to give away. It's something that's understood to be a way you have come to be that is a poison that has entered your system, and your true self needs to remove to be able to reach its authentic selfhood. Like, if you want to use that language of self.
It's kind of like an idea of a bug that's gotten on you, or a rash that you've got that you've got to
exactly
cure yourself of.
In which the mental defilements of greed, hatred, and delusion are gradually overcome through the cultivation of non-greed, aloba, non-hatred,
loving kindness,
adosa, and non-delusion,
wisdom.
moha.
Yeah.
And in their positive formulations, generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom. Yeah, I can get with that. Like, I can get with that, right? Like, and I think this is, I think at its root, there is an element of Buddhism that is rooted in turning away from the world, right? Which I don't find that to be a way to live, right? And there are plenty of Buddhists who have taken that tradition and interpreted it in a very worldly, world-affirming way, right? And one of the things I think we need to understand about traditions of thought and of religion is that they're big and complex, and lots of people do lots of things with them, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the questions is how do you get from what I think was an original vision, which was pull away from the world, become a monk, become part of this orientation toward enlightenment. If you can't do that, sure, do something else, but eventually it's so you can be reborn to be a monk, right?
Yeah.
To become the kind of world-affirming Buddhism that you see in a figure like Thich Nhat Hanh, right? Who, even though he is a monk, is not saying become a monk, right?
Yeah.
He's saying find the space in your life to have true happiness, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's through this sort of incision in thought, right? This ability to really boil it down to these key things. And I do think, like, in my thinking through all the moral philosophy I've read and all, the heart, and both in the philosophical tradition and in the religious traditions, the heart of it seems to be, if you want to have a better world, learn to be generous, right? Learn to not necessarily reject that you have good things or even that you can acquire good things, but learn to share them, right? Learn to give to others without necessarily expecting that return, right? Yeah, when you're in a certain kind of, I'm not going to walk into the bank and say, hey, here's $100, bank, because I'm feeling generous today, right? You got to think about it. Like,
Yeah.
certain places that are there. Live with loving kindness, right? And what is that? That's to me like, one, kindness, care, but a care that is rooted in your heart, that is rooted in making that connection with the other being as a human being. And then wisdom, you gotta have an ability to understand the world. What is wisdom the antidote to? It's the antidote to delusion. So it's not just sort of, well, I think when we say prajna here and we translate that as wisdom, sometimes we make this distinction between wisdom and knowledge in the West often, where wisdom is this thing. It's like, oh, it's kind of wisdom. And it's like, whether you're right or wrong is important because it's wisdom, right? But that's not how it's understood, I think, in this context. It's very much understood as a form of knowledge, and a form of knowledge that can be right and can be wrong. So you got to get it right. You got to understand the world, and you got to understand yourself, and you have to have that focus on truth along with your focus on love and along with your focus on generosity. What's not in that is justice, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that's just good to put there, right? That's one of the things to note. It is part of what Thich Nhat Hanh, I think, says in Living Buddha, Living Christ, is what he learned from the Christian tradition was justice, and the role of justice in building a just world in leading to what he saw as what he was trying to do as a Buddhist. But yeah, anyway, sorry to go on a digression there.
That's perfect. That's what we're talking about. Next, we get into the Anana Sutta, where they talk about 4 different types of happiness, or 4 different ways you kind of experience happiness. And the first one is happiness from material wealth that's generated from hard work, and the feeling of having enough, like contentment through a day's hard work, a day's labor. The second one is happiness from enjoying material wealth, using the wealth to promote well-being in yourself and in others, your family, your community. that you generate a lot of happiness from having material wealth that's improving the lives of yourself and others. The third one was being debtless. Happiness from being without debt, meaning you've fulfilled all your obligations. And the fourth one is happiness from being blameless, which means you have a clear conscience. And it said that the most important of all of those was clear conscience, was being blameless.
Yeah, that's
living with a clear conscience.
Yeah, the happiness of being blameless, which is experienced by those who, because of their generosity and good conduct, enjoy the deep satisfaction of having a clear conscience.
Well, it almost like requires all the other ones, probably, like that you have, you've when I met with the Dharmacharya, the Dharma teacher from the Thich Nhat Hanh community, we talked about the Eightfold Path, and one of them is this, or what is the, oh my God, there was like 5 precepts, and one of them was, that your livelihood, the way you're making a living, is not hurting anybody,
right?
That you're not taking advantage of anybody, that there's this and they talked about it in here, of blameless occupation.
There's an interesting aspect, I think, of Buddhist ethics that has that notion of right livelihood, which actually fits really well with a kind of occupational consumer-based culture in which we live, right? Where your value is finding a job or an occupation or a vocation that contributes to your society and brings wealth to you, right?
Right.
In this kind of consumer culture that we exist in, right? To some extent, this notion of right livelihood, which I don't get as much in a lot of other ethical traditions, that just calls out like that decision about what you're gonna do, or if you don't have a choice about that, how you go about doing what you're gonna do.
Yeah.
Right? That you've got a role in life, a role in society, and maybe this is because it comes out of a period of reflection on Dharma and who's in what positions in society, and the kind of Vedic, post-Vedic background to Buddhism, right? That's also forming up Hinduism, where there's this there's the butcher, the baker,
the caste system,
right?
Right.
And that's really about, I mean, to me, when I look at that seems to be about this very early attempt to analyze the complex social system that's kind of coming about with urbanization, right? You're beginning to have human beings exist not in small bands of kind of shared labor, and you're starting to have human beings exist in complex societies of the differentiation,
specialization,
and specialization that's allowing this economic restructuring to happen, that gives rise to really the early Bronze Age urban civilizations, right? And the early kind of theorists, the Buddhist thinkers, and well, they're not Buddhists yet, but the early like Vedic thinkers who are kind of creating that, are saying, well, how does this fit? How does this fit in relationship to an ideal of a sacred order, right? A sacred order to the universe, right? And so starts saying, oh, there's people who do this and people do. So you get this early occupational theory of society, that people take on different occupations, and in it they work together to contribute to the society. And the kind of Dharmic view is like, if we can just get this all right and put these all in the right place and make sure that if you're born a butcher, you know that your role is to be a butcher, you can start training to be a butcher early on, etc. Buddhism rejects that, right? It puts, I think, more emphasis on human will and human choice, the responsibility for choice, the sense that you are not just a product of your karma, but you're also a product of the decisions you make in relation to your karma.
You can choose what profession you go into. You can choose your destiny.
Right. And that is not merely a freedom in the way we often use freedom. It's a liberty, which means it comes with a responsibility.
Yeah.
Right. And that responsibility is to make the right choice, right? And to choose and how do you make the right choice? Well, you choose something that doesn't bring harm.
Yep.
But also, interestingly enough, if generosity is an important thing to cultivate, is it important to choose a choice that allows you to, like, is there a argument here for acquiring wealth correctly and sharing it correctly, right? To do that thing where you say, let's make this space more, let's make the farm work better so we get more food out of it for the community.
Yeah.
And in that way, I can be generous. It's not just about kind of giving everything away and not worrying, like there's often this way in which when we hear generosity, we think about just giving it away, but you got to have stuff to give away if you're going to be generous.
You have to be productive.
Right. You have to find a way. Yeah. And that seems to be part of what's going on here is there's a happiness from doing work, right? Doing good work, the perseverance of doing good work. And I think we've all experienced that, right? If you've had a job that you actually like, right? Or even if it's just a job that's okay, and you've gone to work one day, even like I remember early on when I was washing dishes in high school.
Yeah.
There were definitely days I came out and I felt good. And I felt good because it was like 6 hours of solid dishes.
Yeah.
And I was on it and I got them done.
Yeah. You feel good about a day's
Right.
work done.
Right. Like that seems to be that, and then earning the money for it. And that was part of it, right? Like I did the work, I did it well, and now I'm cashing my check and I can go buy some comic books.
Yeah.
That's me at 16, right? Like
It's the same kind of feeling I have when I've worked out.
right.
It's like choosing to invest in yourself or choosing to invest in,
Right.
in
And when you work out, the wealth then is a healthier body.
healthier body.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, and so
It's an investment.
right. So it's not that the wealth is not part of the happiness, but it's only part of the happiness in the right context with the perseverance, with the hard work.
Yeah.
And then there's just the enjoying of wealth. But again, here the Buddhist teaching is not just that, like, I got lots of money, I got gold chains.
It's well-being.
It's the use of that wealth to promote well-being for yourself and for others.
And they talk about that as well-being being chanda.
Yeah.
Chanda is good nutrition, adequate housing, healthcare, education, spiritual growth.
Right.
When you talk about well-being, I think that's what they're thinking about. Are we improving my nutrition? Am I improving the nutrition of my family and my community? Do I have adequate housing? Does my family have adequate housing? Is there, healthcare? Is everybody healthy? Do they have access to health? And
Right.
then spiritual growth, education, all of that type of stuff.
Right, exactly. And I think that's, he says this means avoiding the extremes of extravagance and miserliness, right?
Am I hoarding?
Am
I buying too much and only
right,
flashy cars and
exactly,
fancy watches and
yeah. All of this seems to be part of why that prajna, that wisdom, is important, because you actually got to do it right. Like there's a responsibility to think about what's going on with your wealth, what's going on with your occupation, what's going on with your life, and really trying to discern what the truth is on what's going to benefit you and others best.
yeah.
So you can't walk around in ignorance and just say, well, I'm ignorant, so I'm blameless. Right? That seems to be part of the Buddhist teaching here. You have to overcome that ignorance. You have to do the work to do so.
Yeah. To know what it is to live in moderation.
Right. And that's then you have to study, right? And in Buddhism, there is a part of prajna that people often forget in the West, which is study the text, study the tradition, study logic, study reason, study how knowledge becomes truth.
Education. Yeah.
But it's also meditation, right?
Spiritual growth.
Right. But also the way meditation calms the mind to allow you to apprehend reality with naked awareness and not through distraction. Like ultimately what meditation does, how does it help us grow spiritually? Well, how does sitting still and like clearing your head of stuff help you grow spiritually? Part of, at least I think the way it does it is it trains your mind to attend to what is there instead of trying to make another story about it that's going to distract you from having that naked awareness.
Being too quick to interpretation.
Right.
To putting off interpretation a little bit longer to be with the raw experience.
Right. And that's fundamental, right? And I think that's why when you talk about interviewing people who have looked at meditation outside of the context of Buddhism or the spiritual traditions and see this real value for human beings, I think it's because what Buddhists were getting at, it's a form of mental training.
Mental training, yep.
Yeah, it's like going and working out in the gym. It looks different.
Yeah.
You got a different kind of experience.
But you ask 100 people if they want to sit still for, let's just say, 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of them would say, that's going to be difficult. I don't want to do that. Why would I do that? Or,
Right.
It is you have to really say yes to it,
right,
and commit.
And you got to commit, and you got to commit to doing it for the benefit of awareness.
To do nothing.
Right. And not commit to it because you want to be a really good sit stiller.
Yeah.
Right. And get to where the, like, I'm a good sitter or still sitter. I sit still real well and have everybody look at you. That guy sits still really well. He's such a meditator.
Do you think it matters why? As long as they're sitting still, I think they're
does.
getting the medicine.
I think you need to have that intent, or else there's a way in which the practice can become the distraction.
That's probably true. Sitting still
with
intention.
That's why you have to have the other forms of knowledge too. Like I said, the theoretical knowledge is important too in classical Buddhism.
Yeah.
It's not just meditation.
So because that lets you know how to meditate, or
right.
There
are different ways in which you train your mind.
What you practice makes permanent. So you could sit there and sit still and just ruminate the whole time, as opposed to whether body scan, like take awareness to the breath, or
right. Or you could get all that up by being like, I am such a good meditator.
The whole time just being like, I'm just the best meditator.
I just
this form
had a mosquito land on my nose and it bit me and I didn't even react.
I'm the coolest guy. Yeah. Which, I mean, there are probably folks that do believe that meditation is a part of their personality.
Yeah.
Something that gives them value. I mean, I'm guilty of that.
Of course.
I think that my meditation practices says something about who I am, and it's something that and
it's not something you're guilty of. I mean, I think that's the point. Like, it's that what they're describing as poisons are not things that anyone is immune from.
Yeah.
Right? So even this sort of language of guilt, like, I'm guilty of that. Not to drill in on you, but like, it's part of what I think that some of the difficulty in understanding what's going on here is we come from a moral framework which is all about guilt and blame and praise.
When actually it's like, I've been influenced by that.
Right.
If you walk this path, if you live in this community, you're going to be influenced in ways that you need to have that wisdom.
Right.
That's what we're talking about. Delusion versus wisdom. It's like, I got some of that on me. I need to brush that off and not buy into that influence.
Right. The fact that you have greed is not a moral failing. The fact that you don't respond to that greed by stopping and saying, hey, is this bringing me what I really want? As someone who has the character to take responsibility for how my activity in the world impacts myself and others. That's the potential moral failing, right? If you want to think of, but I don't even know if it's a moral failing. I think it's more of a, like, increasingly, I like it's kind of like a mental health failing, right? It's just like, it's not good for you. Stop and cut it out.
Yeah.
And it hurts people around you.
Yeah. Which gets to a definition of happiness that they provided later in the chapter, where they talked about happiness wasn't really wealth at all. It was the way that society viewed you, or the way your relationships, your communal connections, and your social network.
Right.
That was wealth. that really struck me. Being someone that, wants to have community, wants to, have good, rich connections and be a part of the world in a meaningful way, and
Yeah.
have kind of struggled to find that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think so. And I think sometimes when we're trying to, what drives us to sort of that greedy acquisition of wealth, right, is to get that look at me, I'm wealthy,
And it's shortcut.
to have
It's
a
a shortcut.
recognition.
It's not through relational, like changing people's mind one person at a time,
Right.
by their experience of you.
Right.
You know that Maya Angelou quote that people don't remember you by what you said. They won't remember you by what you did. They'll remember you by how you made them feel.
Right.
And this idea of like in engaging with people, engaging with the world where they feel comfortable with you. They feel, there's some, I don't know, some like safety or feeling of like that guy's solid or that gal's solid, versus, oh, I just see their name everywhere, so it's a pervasive brand that I know of.
Right. I mean, and again, I come back to like, what do you want people, what would you want people to remember you for? Like, it's not enough to have people remember you.
It's like how do they remember you?
Right. Like, do you want them to remember you just because they saw your name everywhere? Or do you want them to remember you because...
Are they even remembering you when they see your name everywhere? Right. But maybe they are, because the root of who you are is this vanity, this like person that, strives to, like you said, control or be out there in the world so that they're, maybe that's what some folks are desperate to have.
Yeah.
I don't know. For some reason, the word that comes to me, or the other character that comes to me, is like this Warren Buffett character, where they just live in this small house, which I'm sure he has a tremendous amount of wealth, but you don't see Warren Buffett's name on a bunch of stuff. You don't see, No,
because he's just trying to make money.
Well, he is making money.
Yeah, I know. Like, and I mean, that's sort of like, he as a figure is an interesting figure because he is laser sharp focused on, he's almost like scary laser sharp focused
on making money.
My job is to make money, right? And it's almost this sort of occupational role he assumed that's more about that first part of happiness. I'm happy because I did a good job today making money.
Right.
And he's gotten so good at it, he's just amassed a lot of wealth. To some extent, when you read like interviews with him, it's kind of like he doesn't know what to do with it,
because he's not a flashy person.
Because he's not
buying fancy watches, or
he's not in it
cars,
for that. He's in it because he's good at making money, and it makes him feel good to make money. I mean, I'm projecting a lot, on him, but that's kind of the impression I get, and that seems to fit that first kind of mode of happiness in Buddhism of a job well done.
Job well done.
He's just doing it at this scale. But yeah, he's and to some extent, I mean, he does also do that second thing where, you see him trying to donate to causes that actually seem to help humans and whatnot, because he's trying to figure out what to do with this money. That's the second layer. What was the third one?
The third one is happiness from being debtless. He's probably debtless. He's fulfilled all his obligations.
Well, yeah, that's yeah. Well, and that's moral debt as well as financial debt.
Yeah.
Right? It's sort of like, that's the happiness when you're like, kids go off to have their own life and you have fulfilled your obligation.
To bringing them up, right, to preparing them for the world,
right? So there's all those like that. Like once you've fulfilled on a deep bond and debt you have to someone, I think that's clearly a form of happiness.
Like if someone saves your life, you have to follow them around and help them for the rest of their life.
But that's not what it's saying, right? It's saying that you've released the debt.
Oh, you say like, you saved my life. You could just follow me around for 2 years.
Right.
And then we're good.
Or yeah, like we're good.
We're good. Just right off the bat, we're good?
We're good.
Like,
if someone saved your life, if someone saved your life.
My life, yeah.
Would you feel a debt to them?
Yes.
If you saved someone's life, would you feel like they
were indebted to me?
Were indebted to you?
No, I don't know.
That's it. I mean, it's an interesting thing to think about. Like, where does that sense of obligation come from?
I don't know that I'd feel like they were indebted to me, but I'd feel some pride for like being responsible.
Right.
For
That's
continuing to live.
There's some legitimate happiness that should come about.
I feel like
doing a good.
I make people continue to live, and there's
Yeah.
an example.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not a doctor or anything.
Again, like it's just sort of an interesting way to think about things like that.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else to say on this?
Throw out the book time.
Oh, are we supposed to throw out the book?
What are you running out of time? Where are we at?
No, I'm running out of brain, but I can go for a little longer.
Let's throw out the book on this.
Let me read this last two lines from the book first.
Okay.
Because I think given our earlier conversation into the election, this was sort of timely.
Okay.
The nonpartisan aspect of the Buddhist approach challenges us to move beyond the narrowly defined ideological positions, liberal and conservative, that dominate current political debate. Such views may ultimately prevent us from seeing and skillfully addressing the suffering caused by poverty, inequality, and lack of opportunity for human development. And I think that's the thing, going back to your like, so many people who in, the kind of broader political community, we may find ourselves sort of just seeing the enemy as Republicans, seeing the enemy as Trump, right?
Yeah.
Whatever's going on there, those might provide obstructions to the work, and we have to deal with that. Or they might be allies for the work, and that would be great. Like if all is said and done, having had 4 years of this administration before, I'm not counting on it, but I'm open to it. If we can combat poverty, inequality, and lack of opportunity for human development, those are the enemies we're trying to fight.
Yeah.
Poverty is the enemy. Right?
Yeah.
And I'm always happy to work with anyone who wants to work on poverty, who wants to work on getting rid of suffering. Yeah.
That's the Buddhist position.
Right.
Yeah.
And poverty is just the word we use for deep economic suffering.
Yeah.
So, yeah. All right. Throw the book out.
Throwing the book out. When I think about greed in my life, I think about like, I don't want to tip everywhere. In Austin, it's gotten to where you're supposed to tip at a convenience store. And I'm like, does that mean that I'm greedy? That I'm like, that in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, if I get it takeaway versus sitting, like I only want to tip if I sit down at a restaurant. Like tipping for some reason comes into dana. That the word for it, right, is dana. And to be honest, I might be I don't think I'm greedy. I just don't feel like I have enough yet to be super generous. But at the same time, I probably have a lot more than a lot of people.
Well, I mean, and it's an interesting space because I have a similar response, but I'm less kind of resentful about it. I tend to tip in the service industries where tipping is historically there. Tipping, I think most good economic analysis shows, is an exploitative structure. It allows companies to underpay their workers based on the fact that they're getting tips.
Yeah.
And so continuing to tip to some extent always contributes to that. But that doesn't help the person who's right there expecting a tip if you're in a traditional industry where tipping is the norm, like in a restaurant, right? Yeah. So I feel like as, an economic agent in the world trying to manage this right, I should tip. And I tip generously when I tip.
Yeah.
But yeah, the fact that someone programmed a tip screen
and they've put it everywhere now.
Doesn't mean that I have an obligation to tip. So I don't think that's greed. I think that's partly a form of resistance to migrating us to a set of economic structures that basically take one of the most exploitive industries we have, which is the service industry, mm-hmm. which, the fact that it's so exploitive is I think when I think about it is like when I talk to my students about what they're trying to get out of by going to community college, like half of them are trying to get out of the service industry.
Yeah.
Right. So why should we migrate that economic structure into these other spaces and make them even worse? So that's why, maybe this is all a story I've come up with to justify my greed and not wanting to tip. But yeah, that's why I've resisted that expansion of tipping culture. And that's why I really love places like Black Star that are like, we don't take tips.
Yep.
We just pay our people a living wage.
I like that.
Yeah.
Just charge what you need to charge for the food.
But I do have to remind myself when I'm looking at their menu, I'm like, oh yeah, like this doesn't have that 20% markup.
That's why this burger is $20.
Right. Yeah. So
yeah. Where does greed play into your life?
Oh, I think I can justify my greed a lot when I sort of project it out into people I love and care for, like my family. Like I'm not acquiring it for me. It's for my family, right? I think that's, like that, those are the kinds of spaces there are. I think I like books.
You like books?
I like books, and there's a greedy acquisition of
insatiable.
Like I just want to, like there's a level at which I feel good when I acquire things like that I love, right? And I think at the heart of it is like I'm currently rearranging our entire living room because we're putting in some new furniture stuff and having to go through my entire library that's at home, which is only half my library because my other half of my library is at work. Like this is the point I'm at, is that if I had to bring my books home from work, I don't know where I'd put them, because that drive to acquire has been
something about having these books just makes you feel better.
Yeah, it makes me feel better. It feeds my ego of myself as a scholar.
Yeah.
Like it's part of it is I love them. Part of it's the kind of idea of who I am that they project. Yeah. So
you're a book person.
Books, games, yeah, the things I love to acquire them, and I love to acquire them in the full series with the
you like
so
to
I have
all
20 of that series.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even though I've probably only read 3 of them. Yeah. That's definitely a driver for me.
Where else do I see myself being greedy? Or how does this chapter play into my life? I think is the question I'm asking both of us. Man, I might tell on myself here, but when I go to contemplative practice communities, I haven't been giving them the dana. I haven't put in money in the basket. For the last, I feel kind of gross telling on myself in this, but I would go to the Austin Zen Center every Wednesday, and I wouldn't contribute.
Yeah. I mean,
it seems like I should probably contribute something.
Yeah. Even if a little.
Why am I not?
Right. That's a good question. I found myself doing that too, partly because I began engaging with going to spiritual communities, right? Without any, I was at $50 a month for groceries.
Yeah.
Right. So I felt like, and they would say, look, if you can't afford it, still come. Right.
Yeah, of course.
And I took that seriously. But that period of I don't want to say poverty, because there was a lot that was holding me up, but that period of very limited means led me into habits of doing that. So I have had to be very self-conscious about that and remember that I'm supporting important work, important people, right?
Yeah.
I mean, right now, my life has gone crazy professionally in a good way.
Yeah.
I have moved into an administrative position. I am working 7 to 5, every day, 7 to 6, sometimes more. It's good work, but it's just it's intense. It's very different than when I was teaching. I'm not teaching at all right now. I'm just pure administrator work.
Yeah.
And back end administrator work. I don't know if I've shared. I help support the team that builds the schedule.
Okay.
makes our transfer agreements happen, that makes like all the like operations behind the academic program
Okay.
really go. Like, and it's been really hard to get to yoga, right?
You haven't been going to yoga.
I haven't been going to yoga for several months. It's been like 3 months since I've been.
You need to go to yoga. That
I do.
feeds you.
But at the same time, like I since I am in a space of prosperity where I can afford it, and it seemed good, and it also seemed a good deal for when I was going 2 or 3 times a week. I'm on kind of the monthly, like I pay you this fee, and I can come to yoga whenever I wanted at the studio,
Mm-hmm.
right? I've kept that up, right? And every time it comes up on my thing, I'm like, I'm not going to yoga. Should I? And then I stop myself and I was like, it's not transactional.
You want there to be yoga.
These are good. Part of why I went to the studio is because these are good teachers.
And you want them to be
And I
paid.
need to support these teachers while I'm going through my own stuff. I need to not beat myself up about not going to yoga, right? I'll get there. I need to kind of sort this out.
Don't beat yourself up, but go to yoga.
Exactly.
Because this is not sustainable.
Right, exactly.
Because the yoga is a part of a healthy life.
Absolutely. But I don't need to be like, well, I'm not getting the goods right now, so I should stop paying, right?
I would probably be like that.
Yeah, but you're in a different economic situation than me right now.
True.
Right? And
I got laid off, y'all.
Right.
I got laid off like months ago, and I'm investing in this.
Right.
This is what.
So when you're talking about these as examples of greed, there's part of me that's like,
I'm kind of in a different position.
You're in a different position right now.
For a while.
You're like, yeah, I'm a professional with a salary that can afford to, maintain a fee to my teachers that I respect.
Right.
And I think it's important to see those differences, right? And not to reduce these kind of behaviors to good behaviors or bad behavior on the behavior itself. Not understanding
that's that wisdom.
Is. Yeah.
Yeah. What's your situation determines kind of how you behave. And
again, I think part of it is like, it's not that greed is this like, I'm a bad person because I don't want to tip, or I'm a bad person because I don't always put the money in the jar at the meditation center, right?
Yeah.
It's that greed is a poison that keeps you from the generosity that will help heal your heart and the people around you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's more about connecting with that goodness that the greed stands in the way of.
Feeling good through giving the money. Is that what you mean? Like when you put it in there, feeling good about your participation in something?
I think being good.
Being good.
Being good, not feeling good. Feeling good is good, right? That's part of the happiness that comes.
Being good.
Being good, right? Like we often talk about feeling good or looking good. We'd be served better if we focused on being good.
A virtuous life.
Right. Yeah.
If given the opportunity, I want to be good.
Mm-hmm. Most people do. That's what's surprising.
And I've found some level of discipline.
Even if they want to be a villain, they want to be a good villain.
They want to be a good villain. I've found some level of discipline in my life. Most currently is like, I go to workout classes, I ride my bike, I go on walks. I've found discipline. Historically, if there's a situation where I can get something and not pay for it, if it's like donation based, I'll want to give this least donation or none at all, and that's something I really need to look at.
That's an interesting, I think that's worth exploring. Like, what is that about?
I think I might be the person that you're talking about that's like, where's the loophole? Because if someone was like minimum donation, I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. It's donation, which means I give it or I don't give it, but I'm able to participate regardless. That's that like gray area seeking a way to, be a part of something without necessarily honoring the intent of the rules.
Right. And I think there are some people who are just nasty that's like how they are. But I think the majority of people who have that, it's probably rooted in trauma. It's probably rooted in survivorship. It's probably rooted in like I've had to hold things together
Yeah.
under tough situations before. So I've developed a
Grant's being kind to me right now. He's saying you've lived through trauma, which I have lived through
Right.
trauma. There's that sort of stuff and scarcity.
Yeah.
And I don't want to ever have nothing.
right.
I don't ever want to be. I've been poor.
But I do think that the reality is human systems work better if they're built off generosity.
Generosity.
Right.
How do you think we get there? How do you think I think for me, I thought, well, instead of giving nothing, why don't I just start with $1? I always give $1 into these.
How's that feel?
I haven't done it yet.
You got a theory.
I've got a theory.
Well, practice it.
I need to go get a bunch of dollar bills.
Yeah.
And then just put $1 because that's not nothing.
Right. Yeah. And don't make it, I'm only going to give $1. Just be like, I'm at least going to give $1. If you feel like it that day and you got $5, give $5.
I'll go get that 5 changed.
Right.
I'll get changed for the 5.
Yeah. You're gaming it, man.
Ugh. It's a 5. Yeah, I'll give $1. I'll give a $5 bill. Part of me feels like if I give $5 or $1,
do you have a fear that like if you give something that you've set precedent that you're now obligated to?
a little bit of that, but also like when I need that dollar, it's not going to be there.
Uh-huh.
Like there's a part of me believes this is never going to work and eventually I'll be destitute. And the retail pair of pants I bought 4 years ago could have been this thing that sustained me another month of doing a job that
that's nonsense,
currently
man.
doesn't.
You got to give that up.
I know.
Like
That sushi dinner.
Yeah, that is not going to make or break this. Like
The sushi dinner.
you're right. This may or may not work.
Right.
But your sushi dinner or your $5 in the jar at the meditation center, those are not going to be what makes or breaks you.
And meditation. And I believe in meditation.
Right.
I believe in the value of contemplative practices.
Right.
Buddhism.
No, all right. So I think it's funny because one of the earliest things that helped me restructure my relationship to wealth and money was this like photocopied, this was in the 90s, late 90s, photocopied like 30-page chaos magic, wealth magic grimoire manual I got.
What are you talking about?
Like it was just this thing on like practices for getting money.
Magic?
Yeah, like magic, like spellcraft for money, like from a chaos magic perspective.
Okay. What is chaos magic?
Chaos magic is like my root discipline, right? It's a form of magical practice that evolved really in the 60s and 70s. That was kind of like results-oriented spiritual discipline, results-oriented magic. Like, what is the goal? How do you get that? Develop a practice around that. All the spiritual tradition nonsense is only useful in as much as it works for you or it doesn't. So if praying to Jesus Christ works for you, you do that. If praying to Superman works for you, you do that. You figure it out.
Praying to the flying spaghetti monster?
Yeah, if that's that works the mojo to get you where you need to go, you do that.
So it's results-oriented.
It's results-oriented. Like whether there's some sort of magical thing going on, great if that works for you.
That makes sense
If
in the
it's-
context of you saying
It's all
like,
a psychological game, do it.
it totally makes sense now. Earlier when you said, I was really distraught over what was going to happen after I died. So your chaos magic was, I'm going to come up with an afterlife that I really dig.
That was totally
that works for me.
Totally coming out of, that was like peak chaos magic period.
That makes total sense.
So I got this handbook that was just about wealth magic. And basically it was an interesting handbook because like part of it was like, here's how to do a budget. Here's how to like think like it's sort of, if you want to get money, here are the spells to do so. Like balance your checkbook, maintain a budget, etc. But then there was this whole thing about remapping your relationship to money, right?
Yeah.
And that a lot of people have problems with money because they have made money a kind of moral issue for themselves, right? And having money is bad. Eat the rich, right? Like that. If you have money, you're a bad person. So you have to restructure that, right? And that was a lot of practices. Like I remember one that I did is just like when you have money in your wallet, take it out, look at it and think about how good it makes you feel to have some money in your pocket
Nice.
and put it away, right? Write yourself absurd checks. Like, I'm going to write myself a check for $1 million and then burn it up in the candle flame.
That's what Jim Carrey did.
Right.
He wrote himself a check for $1 million when he wanted to become successful in acting. And,
Right.
And he dated it like a year later or something, or some few.
Yeah, and that had a real profound effect on my relationship to money, right? I began to no longer resent money, but to see it ultimately not as something to acquire or something to like avoid,
Mm-hmm.
but as an energy to take in and help shape the world in the way that fits my truth, right? And for me, that truth is like, I don't know if all of us should be loving, kind, caring people, etc., right? I do tend to think that's root of what it is to be a human. I might be wrong, right? I do seem to run into some humans who they are seems to be not that 100%. And it's not that they like had some trauma that sent them sideways. They just seem to be oriented around destroying other people, right? I can't say that I think they're bad people or wrong. I can say they might be dangerous enough for the rest of us that we got to figure out how to deal with them.
Right.
Right? Like I can say that.
Right.
But that kind of moral judgment that's fundamental. I still honor them as human beings, and in some ways, like a human being.
The same way you would honor a snake.
Right, exactly.
That slithers.
Right.
The same way you'd honor a tiger that eats,
right,
bird babies or something.
But I don't think that's who we really tend to be as a whole, right? Like
we're social beings.
Right, exactly.
I think the predisposition is probably to behave in a social situation in a way that's helpful for others because we had to be social to survive. I think evolutionarily speaking.
So yeah, the way I relate to money is much more like that now, like where I'm really happy to be paying to support my teachers, even when I can't make it.
The yoga teachers, yeah.
And I'm happy to be in a place in life where
You're like a patron. This is like a patron,
right? And
patron's happiness.
That's kind of that happiness they were talking about. The second form of happiness of having wealth and using it well. That's real. I think that's real. And that's part of my restructuring of my relationship to money, to have so I guess at the end of the day, it's not about rejecting wealth. It's not about rejecting money. It's not about rejecting prosperity.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to be about having a different relationship, but part of that relationship is taking responsibility for that wealth, for yourself and for others. That seems to be what you're going through all over, right? A lot of what you're doing, it seems, is trying to figure out how to reconfigure things so you're better at being a good person.
Yeah, for sure.
And probably what I think is rightfully the case, you need to begin at home, right? The first thing you need to learn how to be good to is yourself.
Yeah.
Right? That doesn't mean you need to put off being good to other people till that's done. But to a certain degree, a big focus needs to be there. I do think like a kind of self-effacing goodness is a recipe for disaster. Partly because in my experience, when you watch people who are like truly self-effacing.
What is self-effacing?
Like where you deny yourself for others. Where you.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like.
People-pleasing at your own expense.
Right. Those people actually seem to go sideways pretty often.
Yeah.
And become.
Well, there's like resentment,
right?
A lot of stuff that like
it builds up, that
simmers underneath the surface.
So I do think that like part of it is
once you manage your own house, once you clean your own house, nurture self-compassion, self-empathy, all of that stuff, this is not what I imagine, and probably what I've looked into. You start to build a world that's from that positive perspective.
Right.
Because I'm giving myself empathy, I'm giving myself compassion, and I'm the person that creates this whole world. I'm the person that creates you. So I create you in my image. Right? To some extent.
I mean, to a certain extent to yourself, yeah.
I'm like, if I'm a compassionate, empathetic person, I'm going to endow people with that at the onset. Yeah, sure, they could do things that would make me more cautious, but even the things they do, I would probably interpret in that lens. with that lens of compassion, empathy, grace,
Generosity.
and I struggle with that.
Right.
I had a I've been for a long time. I haven't been dating. I took my stuff off of dating apps, and I reconnected with someone, and in my mind, I started thinking, is this a romantic partner? And when it became clear that it was possible, I started viewing their communication differently through this like more anxious lens, through this more like, oh, this matters now. Now I'm like anxious, preoccupied. And I almost saw the whole thing go down in real time. And the way that I behaved from that place was not good.
Right.
I didn't like it.
Right.
And they didn't like it.
Right.
It like almost like, I think it probably squashed that.
Yeah, you still got work to do there.
I don't know. That might never change though. I don't know how you change your attachment style.
Patience.
Because my experience has been with folks that I don't, oh man, this is not the right word, but when I don't have that like intense desire like that, what's the word? What's the right word? When I can be more nonchalant. When I'm more nonchalant, things tend to like happen where there's greater connection and there's more attraction and all of those things.
When I coming from a space of equanimity instead of grasping.
But I grasp still, Grant.
Yeah. It's hard.
I grasp.
It's hard, especially, well, and I think that is part of like when they're talking about that biological desire, right? Which, if I remember correctly, you said is associated more with sexual desire than a desire for food. Right? That grasping, yeah, it's part of who we are. You know, it is an energy that can get in the way pretty severely and is hard to let go of. Yeah.
That's why it's such a big part of Buddhism. I mean, that's Buddhism.
Right. And
grasping, attachment, craving.
Yeah. And we're looking at a tradition that ultimately says, yeah, the solution is, yeah, you can be a householder, but you need to leave everything behind and go meditate for 8 hours a day and study the scriptures, right? You know, like there's a pretty high bar that's not, you know, and even if you don't go to that narrative, it's a tradition that says this may take several lifetimes.
Is that unique to Buddhism? In Christianity, they're like, hey, you need to read the scripture. You need to be contemplative. You need to think about the Bible, right? I mean, this is not unique to Buddhism.
No, a lot of, I mean, to me, that's really a warrant to how hard the work is, right?
How hard it is to get that rash of influence off of you.
Yes.
Because our society is almost in alignment with some organism predisposition.
Right.
The organism wants to grasp, wants to, you know, and so shirking that,
right,
it takes a lot.
Yeah.
You're almost retraining your natural default mode network, if you will.
Right.
And that's hard.
Yeah. 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 I do think it's, though, part of it is about developing intrinsic motivation instead of extrinsic motivation for why you do things.
Internal referencing versus external referencing.
Right. And that allows you to combat vicious incentives better because you're making decisions based on where you're coming from, not what you're trying to
get
in the moment.
Invest in your own house first.
Right. So
clean your own house. And then from that place, then once you've got a clean house, you can look to that house for your resources. You can look inside for your guidance. You can look inside for your...
Yeah. No, exactly. Now, I think you can become as obsessive about having the clean house too, right? It just needs to be clean enough to get on with the work.
This is moderation.
And then part of the cleaning of the house, because who you are is not a person in isolation. Who you are is a person in relationship. So you're never going to be able to pull away completely and just look at this because this
exists in relationship to you, exists in relationship to the others. That's that influence.
Um,
Yeah. This is greed. We're talking about greed today, y'all.
greed.
This has been Phil Phails. Do you have anything you want to say about greed?
Yeah, I mean, the last thing is chocolate. I do like Halloween just happened. There's a lot of chocolate in the house. It's really hard for me to not just stuff my face with it.
Chocolate.
Chocolate
What
is
kind
a source of greed.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. Like, I do like good chocolate, but like
It doesn't matter.
it's like
You'll eat
sugar
the horrible
plus
chocolate.
chocolate.
Ugh.
Is there horrible chocolate?
I mean, I'm not a fan of some chocolates, I guess. Like I'm a dark chocolate guy.
Yeah, there.
Like milk
I
chocolate.
do like milk chocolate.
Oh,
I
you
like-
do.
But there are some like really waxy chocolate. I'll tell you, there is waxy, flavorless hot fudge. If I get like an ice cream, a hot fudge sundae, and it has that, I'm angry.
You're
I'm just angry.
angry.
I'm just like,
If you want to piss Gran off.
like I'm just mad.
Oh my god.
Like there's certain foods that like I don't eat a lot because if they're not good enough, I get mad. So I just avoid them unless I know they're really good.
I've been good about the candy stuff. We've done Switch Witch for a long time in my house.
Great.
The Switch Witch. If you guys don't know about the Switch Witch, I've created this whole narrative in my family that weeks before Halloween comes, in the middle of the night, I hear a Switch Witch. She visits me. Oh, I hear her in the distance. She goes, clickety clack, ga 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 ga. I think the ga 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 is her laughing. I don't know what the clickety clack is. Maybe like the chains that are on her witchly attire. And I tell them, my daughters, about that she's been visiting the area, and they know that means that the Switch Witch is gonna take some of their candy, most of their candy, all but 5 pieces. We didn't do it this year because my kids are getting too old for Switch Witch.
So you took all but 5 pieces of their candy.
I have historically. I have.
And would you do
Well, I
with
let
that
them
candy?
eat the day of Halloween. I let them gorge themselves.
Right. Okay.
They can eat as much on that day. I'm not that, but inside I'm like, this is horrible. I don't think any human being should have that much sugar. I think this is all just like influenced by big candy. You know, these big businesses that are really, it's not good. Like, you shouldn't have that much candy, not that much sugar at no point in your life. But what are you going to do? They love it. They sneak it when they're walking. They're like, and so I've just said, I'm letting it go on Halloween night as much as you want.
But after that, it's the Switch Witch's candy.
I let them choose 5.
Right.
They'll often choose 20. And I'll be like, okay, we got to pare that down. And they're like, but yeah, after that, they get 5 pieces and the Switch Witch gets the rest.
Nice.
And the Switch Witch brings them back. They switch that candy into socks or underpants or something that they need.
Something that a small child be totally delighted by. Awesome.
Yeah.
Socks and underwear.
Yeah. I could probably make that more exciting, that part of it.
All right, I gotta go.
Okay, let's wrap it up. This has been Phil Phails at Philosophy Book Club with Grant Potts, episode 8.
8. We've done 8 of these.
We've done 8 of these. We've been talking about greed and human flourishing. Talking, the book is, he's going to read the title of the chapter?
No.
Oh, you're going to read the next chapter?
Yeah, I was gonna say next time we'll be talking about what do we owe our future generations.
What do we owe our future generations? Thank you guys for watching. I love this time with you, Grant. It's a lot of fun.
I do too.